He got no wonky Chewbacca. What was it? Shit. Oh, 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 oh.
Wonky Chewbacca.
That was my Jabba the Hutt. Let's build something. So this was the picture that started this whole thing. I saw this and thought, wow, that looks pretty fucking cool. And maybe I could do something similar with bounty hunters. Since I have pretty much all of them, except Greedo, because he's dead. But since I pretty much have all of them in figure form, I thought a proper display was in order. So I jumped into Google just to see what I was getting myself into, and I realized that, oh, that's nice. And I realized that it was probably going to be like a 2-day project at most. I was very much wrong. Hindsight's 2020, so I carried on. Now, since I wanted to go for a more traditional Jabba's Palace look for the diorama, I thought maybe a curve would be part of that aesthetic. I couldn't get any of the curves to work whatsoever, and I did try multiple times, but styrofoam just doesn't like to bend very well. The next idea was to go for a classic Jabba's throne room, but oh no. We can't have nice things. See, if I were to have a full throne, which would be to scale, that would mean that none of the bounty hunters would fit, which kind of defeats the purpose of the whole display. So what I actually went for was more of a descending stairway kind of thing. Something you'd still see in Jabba's Palace, but it's more creative than just a throne. So you gotta give me credit there. After laying down the literal groundwork, I moved on to the back part, which I wanted to make a little bit more multi-layered. So I went ahead and cut out a little rectangular piece out of the corner. And then using another piece, I went ahead and just put it behind that, making an indent kind of thing. Not too shabby, right? Moving on from that, it was time to work on the steps. Now, this was just a matter of figuring out how to cut them out evenly. I went for the Dremel, but I might have overdone it a tad bit. I was trying to go for these longer steps, but they of course ended up uneven. It did work better for the smaller steps, which, I didn't have to go too deep in, and I didn't have the right Dremel tool, so everything was a lot harder to cut out, as you can probably tell from all the trouble I'm having trying to cut that piece out. Oh, and that piece of plastic is actually going to be a grate, the one you're probably seeing on screen right now. Eventually, I did manage to cut it out using the sanding tip, but it was a whole pain in the ass, so after some searching, I did manage to find the rest of my tips, which of course came very much in handy when cutting out the rest of the vent grate. Let's go ahead and call them vents, since that's easier for me to say. And that long vent piece actually fit perfectly in that wall indent. That's one more detail I don't have to worry about later. Same with the vent. Great. Vent? Yeah. And to give it some depth, I made a hole which I would later go on to paint black. And with all the groundwork laid out, I pretty much had a good idea what the final product was going to look like, or what I wanted it to look like. And now it's just a matter of making sure all the figures fit nicely in it, which they pretty much kind of did. Jabba's a little hefty. After cleaning up the initial foam mess, which was kind of a waste of time, frankly, you'll see from the next part, I made sure that it fit nicely in this little square, which it did. Moving on to phase 2 of the project, which is arguably the worst part of the project, next to painting, but that's just because I suck at painting. But what makes it so bad is just, it's too addictive. Okay, so that joke wasn't even funny, but you know what is funny? Me hitting my head on my desk. But moving on to the actual plastering, we're just going to do 2 parts plaster to 1 part water. Boring stuff, don't worry, I skip it. And now, this is where we start getting issues. Issues in the sense that I had no idea what the hell I was doing. So, I went ahead and just started off with 2 layers of plaster. And in retrospect, that would have been a perfect ending. That would have been way more than enough. Minimal sanding and I could have gotten the same results as my final product. But no, I'm not a smart boy. So I went for 1 more layer, thinking thick is good. And after stopping at my local Target for some sandpaper, it was time to do just that. Sand some plaster. Yeah, so this is where the problem of the extra thick plaster arises. It made for a lot of sanding. Generally, sanding is not a bad thing. Frankly, the more sanding, the more room for error. And the problem here was that because of that 3rd layer of plaster that was so thick, dumb thick, that I didn't actually realize just how uneven the third layer of plaster made the whole thing. Regardless, I really did try to get everything as even as possible, going as far as to get some special tools to really get an edge on those steps. Was that edgy enough for you guys? After hours of trying to sand it down to the perfect edge, it was time to move on to the final part of the project, the painting. Oh, but wait, are you stupid like I am? Then you're gonna step on it, giving you one more day of plastering. I should have taken it as a bad omen when the plaster shot up at my face, but I didn't, so I carried on.
I honestly, this is actually a horrid idea.
It really was a horrid idea.
No, oh my cat.
I did try to take advantage of the plastering and fix up some of the steps, but again, it didn't really matter in the end because I always fuck up everything up.
Ah, fuck.
Yeah, that's another layer of plastering and sanding that I had to do. Remember how I said 2 layers would have been fine? Well, this is what happens when you go overboard. Can you tell I don't like plastering? I don't like plastering. Anyway, with all that done and out of the way, it was time to move on to the painting, which I wasn't excited about already just because of all the screw-ups I had in phase 2 of the project. It's okay because I was a hopeful boy and I was not going to let anything slow me down. Hindsight is 2020, so everything slowed me down. You see, my airbrush came from AliExpress, which is a Chinese website, meaning that it did not work at all. So I went back to the basics, tried to save some of the paint, which didn't really work, and got right into painting. And thankfully, I didn't really have any more problems here, aside from just running out of paint at the top. But since I still had to do the wall, I ended up using it there. So it's all good. With that base paint down, I am going to go ahead and seal it before I do any weathering, just because that way if I mess up any of the actual weathering, I can just go ahead and clean it off and still get that nice base coat. And it should go without saying, but be smart. Do this in a ventilated area. Do it outside. Do this whole project outside. Don't do it in your room like I did. It will be a mess. Now, rather than dry brushing or wet brushing some highlights on the whole thing, I went for this miniature weathering kit that I had since I could remember. And I never really had a chance to use it, but since it had the perfect orange for it, I thought it'd look okay. And to my luck, it did. And now, because the floor is the floor, I made sure to go and do some just little weathering with my finger. Make sure it gets a nice tint, just to make it look dirtier. I also went back with some black. And that was kind of all I did for the weathering. Not much to it, really. And with pretty much all the weathering done, aside from some touch-ups I'll do at the very end, it was time to do some minor details. So the first order of business was just making a door panel out of Darth Vader's breathing panel. Yes, very innovative. I found an old tube piece that went perfectly there. We can't forget to paint that black, just to give it that depth. And some weathering at the bottom, just to make it really pop. Now I tried doing this like little outlines that I saw in the game, like this. But, of course, it turned out like shit, so I scrapped it. After that, I was getting kind of over the detail work, so I started putting everything together. Now we're really at the home stretch, I promise. These felt pieces are going to serve as our carpets, which we see Jabba lay on, right? We do? I think so. So I cut out a piece just to test it out, and I actually ended up quite liking it, so it did end up being a part of the final product, which is great. For the second carpet, I did want to do more of a cross-section kind of thing with it, so I made sure to leave one side fully flat, and ended up with this. And the last thing I had to deal with is the pillow making, which is not hard at all. What I'm using is an epoxy clay, which is a 1-to-1 ratio of clay. I don't think that matters. But for the pillows, it was just a matter of making some rectangular blobs and crushing the ends to get that little nice pillow feel or look. And the great thing about the epoxy clay is that it sets within an hour. So while you're waiting for one to set, you can start making another one, and so on and so forth. And that's exactly what I did. After making as many pillows as I could be bothered to make, it was time to paint. And luckily enough, I ended up finding an old airbrush, which didn't really want to cooperate with me, but it got the job done, and that's all I could ask for, really. I mean, look, it saved me from having to use regular brushes, so thank you. Alright, with all the pillows painted now, it's time to seal them. Again, wear your mask, all that good stuff. I do recommend working at someplace where you don't care getting it matte, because it'll make everything matte. Back to our display, I went ahead and taped the bottom half just so I could go ahead and spray paint the exposed foam. I do plan on making it like a cross section like the one we see in the photo, but I'm just going to go ahead and move on for now just because I'm kind of over it and I spend way too much time on this. So moving on is exactly what we're doing, and what you're seeing now is just pretty much all the finishing touches, the little weathering on the props, the speckling on the carpet. I don't know what else to say. There's only so much I can say about the weathering. But this is it. This is our final display. Doesn't look like much now. So let's go ahead and take a look at it fully set up. And here are some extra different pictures, just so you can get a sense for what they really look like in different lighting. And with that, we are officially done. Thank you guys for sticking with it, or thank you to that one person who stuck with it. I appreciate you. So yeah, that was my bounty hunter display. I love to hear what you guys think. Harsh criticism is appreciated like always. And if you had a good time, make sure you leave a like. And if you didn't, well, I already suckered you into watching this far, so you might as well leave a like. Alright, well that does it. I'll catch you on the next one.